But first, Arab and Islamic leaders have gathered in Doha for an emergency summit after an Israeli airstrike on the Qatari capital last week. The strike killing 5 Hamas members and a Qatari security officer, narrowly missing the negotiating team considering a Washington proposal for a ceasefire in the war in Gaza. And we're seeing live images there of that meeting underway in Doha, the meeting serving as a pointed show of unity among Gulf and Middle Eastern countries, and will seek to increase more pressure on Israel, with attendees considering a draft resolution. The Qatari Prime Minister has described the strike as state terrorism and is urging the world to reject what he calls double standards. Morgan Eyre has more.
Barbaric state terror. That's how Qatar's Prime Minister described Israel's recent strike against Hamas leaders in Doha. He's calling for Israel to be punished, not just for the attack, but for the continued offensive in Gaza.
Israel should understand that its genocidal wars that target our brotherly Palestinians with the goal of uprooting them from their own land and displace them will not succeed, no matter what Israel says to justify it.
The deadly strike on the territory of a key US ally by another sparked a wave of outrage and criticism. It's led to an emergency summit in which leaders from Arab and Muslim majority countries will be in Qatar on Monday. The gathering is a show of unity and support for the Gulf nation.
The message of this summit, which must reach everyone loud and clear, is solidarity with Qatar from the Arab and Islamic worlds against the aggression of the occupying Israeli state.
It's expected leaders will consider a draft resolution on the Israeli attack, which suggests a threat to the coexistence and efforts to normalise ties in the region.
And this is what the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to say earlier today about that Israeli strike.
Well, we're still getting the final reports. I'll tell you what the impact of the strike is. We sent a message to the terrorists. You can run, but you can't hide, and we'll get you.
Joining me now from Beirut is Dany Moudallal, a journalist for L'Orient du Jour. Dany, thank you for your time. What are we expecting to come out of this meeting? Is it going to be more than simply a statement of condemnation?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. So we know there was a draft resolution that expressed solidarity and unity in the face of Israeli aggression. Now, there are many options on the table, including maybe downgrading diplomatic relations, and that includes countries that already have diplomatic relations with Israel, like the UAE, Bahrain, and others. There are, talks about creating special action committees that would maybe coordinate diplomatic efforts to pressure Israel, sanction Israel, and all of that. And we have a precedent of that. Last time there was a similar meeting, there was a Saudi-led subcommittee that pushed for, more support for a Palestinian state, and we're seeing the result of that at the UN. There are reports as well, though there are more unlikely reports about maybe like an Arab NATO-style alliance that would be led by Egypt. And it's not a new idea, but it's been floating around recently because of the strikes. But that's a more unlikely scenario. I don't think they're considering any military options at the moment.
I mean, one question to ask is, would Doha walk away from any possible future negotiations between Hamas and Israel and ending the war in Gaza?
Well, after the strikes, there were rumors about Doha deciding to pull out of the mediation efforts. Of course, they've been central to that effort in recent years. But then very quickly, officials from Qatar declared that, they have no intention to leave the mediation efforts, although they mentioned that, it's much harder now than it was before. And, it was already difficult before, but now the strikes made it much, much more difficult to reach a solution.
Well, what does it mean for those Abraham Accords, which of course were signed off before October 7th, 2023?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to mention that today marks the 5-year anniversary of the signing of the Abraham Accords with the UAE and Bahrain, the two Gulf states that have signed on the agreement. Of course, these agreements were first touted as a way to create regional stability, but I think the last 2 years have shown that it has its limits, and definitely the strikes in Qatar kind of destabilize this whole idea of expanding the Abraham Accords and including a country like Saudi Arabia. I think it has become much less likely today than it was before.
So will Hamas continue to base its political leadership in Doha, given what happened last week?
That's definitely an important question. I think that in terms of them trying to relocate, it's more complicated. Of course, they have a presence in Turkey and in Egypt. But we don't really have any clear information on Hamas's intentions at the moment. I think for the time being, we should probably consider that they'll be staying in Doha, and I think that maybe in a show of defiance, Doha might decide to let them stay. And then, especially as they said that they would continue mediation efforts, I think that suggests that they will still host Hamas officials.
Coming back to what we were talking about earlier, and that is the sort of the regional ties that had started to develop in the last few years between the Gulf states and Israel. I'm particularly interested about the Saudis because it has been reported for a number of years there's been back-channel discussions going on between the Saudis and the Israelis, given that both countries share their detest of the Iranian regime. So I'm curious to know what's happened in Qatar. I mean, what impact will it have on those sort of ties that were very fledgling but starting to be built between Riyadh and Tel Aviv?
Well, I think it's certainly true that there were reports about there being back-channel contacts, especially with American mediation, to include Saudi Arabia in the accords. But I think, as we can see clearly, October 7th and what came afterwards changed a lot in the region. We even saw at some point some level of rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians, despite the fact that there are very, very big differences. I know that the Saudis, what they want as well is a defense agreement with the United States. That was one of their, core demands in exchange for joining the Abraham Accords. I think that's very unlikely to happen. And we see the Saudis basically leading, along with France, a big diplomatic effort to push for the two-state solution and the recognition of a Palestinian state. And all of these factors, I think, kind of show you that the Saudis aren't exactly very interested in advancing those talks at the moment.
And this also leaves the US in a somewhat awkward position, which has a base in Qatar. And as we were just speaking there, Dany, it's just come across the news agency wires that Rubio is indeed going to visit Doha tomorrow. Yet we've just seen him in Jerusalem offering unwavering support for Israel. So what do you think will come out of that meeting on Tuesday?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the US are trying to balance a very fine line here between reassuring Israel that they still have unwavering US support, and that was part of the reason why the US Secretary of State went to Israel and is there at the moment. And they need to figure out a way also to reassure the Qataris who host the biggest U.S. military base in the region with about 10,000 soldiers, and yet, despite having that, they still got attacked. Now, I think that based on what the Qataris are saying, they've been saying over and over that their relationship with the U.S. is still strong, and in fact, they said, I believe, stronger than ever. So I think for the moment, everyone's trying to figure out a way that satisfies everyone, especially the U.S. Trying to balance those two allies.
Dany Moudallal, a journalist from Le Orient du Jour, thank you so much for your thoughts today.
Thank you for having me.
And as I was saying just there, in a visit to Jerusalem, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling reporters that Washington would indeed provide unwavering support to Israel in the war in Gaza as he called for the eradication of Hamas. Standing next to him, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Rubio's visit was a clear message that Washington stood with Israel and praised President Trump for his backing, calling him the greatest friend his country had ever had. It also came, as Rubio said, plans by Western nations to recognise a Palestinian state would embolden Hamas.
These things that people are doing and these different countries are doing at the United Nations, first of all, they're largely being done because of their own domestic politics. Second of all, they're largely symbolic. They have really no impact whatsoever in bringing us any closer to a Palestinian state. The only impact they actually have is it makes Hamas feel more emboldened. It makes other elements like Hamas feel more emboldened. It actually has made it harder. It's actually served as an impediment to peace.
And Tana Posky has more from Jerusalem.
The main takeaway from this very, very friendly press conference, very relaxed, is that the United States and Israel appear to remain very closely on the same page, that the attack on Qatar, Israel's strike against Hamas leaders in Qatar, was a hiccup in this relationship, but that the United States accepts Israel's need to continue the fighting in Gaza. One question remained a little bit open. A journalist from a right-wing religious Jewish outlet asked the Prime Minister at the very end of this press conference whether Israel will annex the West Bank or declare sovereignty over the occupied West Bank after a number of nations, France, the UK, Canada, Australia, among others, recognize a Palestinian state in a few days at the United Nations General Assembly. Rubio did not respond to this question, and the Prime Minister kind of elegantly slipped away, saying clearly there will be an Israeli response to these unilateral decisions, but that it would be improper for him to discuss what is yet to happen in the future. What I understand from Donald Trump's position, from the current American position, is that, yes, they do want this war over. They want it over as quickly as possible, but that they are accepting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's arguments that the war 2 years in is not yet over, that Israel still has to act militarily in Gaza in order to eliminate Hamas completely. Neither of these gentlemen gave any details about what that would entail. What does it mean to, quote, eliminate Hamas entirely? And I have to say, neither of them made any special emphasis on saving the lives of the Israeli hostages who are still alive in Gaza. That is the number one issue in Israel today. Families of these hostages have petitioned the Chief of Staff of the Army to meet with them because they have received notifications from their army contacts that their children's lives will likely, that their hostages will likely be killed during this onslaught. So in Israel, it's a very agonizing situation, but neither Rubio nor Netanyahu, while mentioning the hostages, neither really emphasized this matter.
Tana Posky reporting there from Jerusalem. In the meantime, Israel has intensified its bombing campaign of Gaza City ahead of the army's plans to seize the area, the IDF urging a full evacuation of Gaza City, once a home to some million people, telling residents to move south. But even for those with the means and the will to flee, there is a little place left for them to go, with residential areas near Han Yunis in ruins.
This is daily life for residents in Gaza City as Israel steps up its bombing campaign. Multiple high-rise buildings were destroyed on Sunday. The Israeli military claims they were used as Hamas observation posts to gather intelligence on troop movements. Residents are being warned to evacuate further south as Israel prepares to take over the enclave's largest urban centre in its bid to eliminate Hamas. But displaced Palestinians in the south have nowhere to go either. This residential area of Khan Yunis has been declared safe to return to, but there's nothing left. Homes and belongings are completely destroyed.
We returned to destruction and devastation, as you can see. I came back and found my home destroyed. I couldn't retrieve any of my kids' belongings or clothes. It's like a ghost town, not suitable for living. There aren't any services.
We came to our homes and found them destroyed. We will have to live in tents again.
90% of some 2 million Palestinians have been displaced, some multiple times, often living in tents and temporary accommodation. Those living in encampments face overcrowding and a severe lack of resources.
And pro-Palestinian protesters forced the Vuelta a España cycle race to be abandoned at its finale on Sunday, with Danish cyclist Jonas Vingegaard declared winner. Protesting an Israeli team's participation, people in Madrid overturned metal barriers and occupied the route at several points as police attempted to push them back. More than 100,000 people took part in the demonstration, according to Spanish authorities. Earlier, the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez expressed admiration for those who he protested for what he described as just causes.
I think sports organizations need to ask themselves whether it's ethical for Israel to continue to participate in international competitions. Why was Russia expelled after the invasion of Ukraine, but Israel is not expelled after the invasion of Gaza? Our position is clear and categorical. Until the barbarism stops, neither Russia nor Israel should be in any more international competitions.